Hello, I'm Justin D. Jenkins, managing editor of the Quintessential Gentleman, and today I am here with award-winning writer, healing justice worker, and founder of Beam, which is Black Emotional and Mental Health Collective, Yolo Akili Robinson. Did I say that right?
It's okay. Yolo Akili, actually.
Yolo
Akili.
Akili Robinson. Awesome, awesome. How are you today, Yolo?
I'm doing good. How are you today?
Doing well, doing well. Thanks again for talking with the Quintessential Gentleman. We love the space that you're creating for Black men and mental health and Black community and mental health. You're coming off of your Black Healing Remixed Summit. How did that go? And can you tell me why was that a great time to kind of have that event go on?
Yeah. Yes, you are right. We just wrapped it up. This is May, it's Mental Health Month. So every year during Mental Health Month, we have our Black Healing Remix Summit. This is our second time having it. And it's a 2-day summit. So one day was all virtual to kind of accommodate our like national audience of folks who want to engage. And then the second day, we had the in-person event in Los Angeles, which was also broadcasted to our national audience. And so it was really important for us to address a variety of different topics. On our virtual day, we had workshops, one led by Dr. Alan Lipscomb, talking about supporting Black family members living with schizophrenia. I co-led a workshop around supporting our friends and loved ones who are struggling with suicidal ideations or thoughts of harming themselves. We also had really powerful conversations around transmitting mental health. We had guided meditations, sound baths. It was really lovely. And then the second day, when we were in person, we brought together this really dynamic panel talking about mental health, masculinity, and the entertainment industry, which you can imagine is a whole different discourse, as well as Miss Debbie Allen, who was our keynote, really having a great conversation about movement and dance. So it was a great time. Everyone who attended got self-care gift sets, virtual or in person. We mailed them out to our attendees. And yeah, it was a really powerful and critical time for us to have these conversations around wellness. There never is a time we don't need to be talking about it.
Yeah.
But I think in this particular political or social moment, it feels much more necessary.
Right, right. Now, during these 2 days, what do you think that attendees took away from this experience?
Yeah, we have some of our early evaluations already coming in. We send out a link to get feedback from folks. And some people, some of the great feedback I've seen already is people saying this didn't feel like a conference, it felt like a retreat. And I love that because for us it's important that when we talk about mental health and healing, that we're not doing it in this kind of hyper academic style that doesn't take into consideration our body's needs, our emotional needs, how we're impacted. Hence why we have the sound baths and the guided meditations and the sacred pauses throughout some of the more difficult or nuanced content. So yeah, I'll take away some of those takeaways. What people saw, I saw people talking about. I think that like for me, the takeaways I want people to have are multifaceted. On one end, I want them to take away tools, really concrete tools and strategies to be able to support themselves and their folks, right? And some of those tools might be learning how to talk about their feelings, learning how to have conversations, learning certain language to avoid or different framing for how they even approach themselves, their emotions. And then some of it's also just kind of opening the door,
Yeah.
you know, for folks to begin to see themselves reflected and mirrored. Maybe they never heard these conversations, and that kind of makes them think of themselves differently.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting how you correlate, the movement, and you got, Miss Debbie Allen to come in, famed dancer, choreographer. Was that something that took time to kind of connect the two and see that the movement and being out also contributes heavily to our mental health?
Yeah, not necessarily from our perspective. I think that historically Western mental health has often been associated with talk therapy. You just sit down and you just talk it out, right? Which isn't really a good representation of really what really happens in therapy and many therapy relationships. I mean, ideally, you're with a therapist who is doing a really intentional behavioral health strategy with you that even though you may not necessarily always be aware of what's happening,
Yeah.
ideally they're mapping out a plan and a guide and a direction with you. Some are more explicit than others. But for us as healing justice workers, we see that in healing justice is this framework that says that our mental health and our wellness are connected to everything. It's not separate from anything. So, of course, the food that I eat, my access to clean water, the systems I live in, if I have affordable healthcare, if I have healthcare, if I have affordable rent, the quality of the air in my community, all these things contribute to our mental health. And so seeing that, like, that dance and that movement as a part of it was like, it's just core to healing justice. And so
Yeah.
making that connection makes sense, particularly with Black people, where, dance, humming, music has been a big way we've been translating our kind of coping for eons, right? So
Right.
so it wasn't hard for us to make that connection, but I think that in the popular culture's imagination, they don't make that connection,
Yeah.
right? Like, so that's one of the reasons we wanted to have her there, because she brilliantly really helped us kind of illuminate that.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting when you bring up just the other factors into your mental health in these systems that were never designed for us and how much it's affecting us. Like you said, the high rent, access to clean water, healthcare, and these are just known things that affects our communities. So it's interesting to take it from that point. Now, before you got here, became YOLO. Now, what was the moment that you realized you needed to prioritize your mental health?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's definitely been several moments, I think, in my journey where I've recognized I needed to cultivate wellness for myself. I think a large part of it was really driven by my experiences in college. I was the first person in my family to go to college. And going to college and reading and studying really illuminated some of the challenges my family, myself, people I loved were navigating. And I started to see all these tools that no one had access to in my community,
Yeah.
right? And so I think in those, it was the really kind of, that was one pivotal moment where I realized the need for me to put in practice certain tools to help regulate and maintain myself, but also begin to like figure out how do I share this broadly with more folks. And I've been writing about mental health and wellness and facilitating social support groups of counseling, of peer counseling of various different forms for like almost 15 years, right? So it's been many points in my journey where I've recognized that my depression or something on my anxiety is contributing to me being in a state of disequilibrium or being in a space of dysregulation. And I need to really kind of check in with myself and kind of reassess where I'm at.
Yeah.
So yeah, so lots of moments, but I would say that was a big moment for me was definitely school.
School, yeah, definitely. And when you notice the lack of resources that our community have, was that the inspiration to start Beam?
Yeah, it was. It was a lack of resources that I saw that our communities had, and I wanted to build an institution or help co-create an institution that could provide tools and resources and space for education and conversation. But I also wanted to build an institution that could also uplift the strategies that our communities already have,
Yeah.
right? I think that's so important to name that we as Black people have always had healing traditions, right?
Mm.
Whether those healing traditions were herb gardens, whether those traditions were like praise and worship,
Yeah.
whether those healing traditions were like trying to think of porch conversations, kitchen table conversations, the style. There are ways in which we've always been processing and moving through the emotional things that we are impacted with, right? The things that we are impacted with that kind of impact our feelings. And so I think it's important for us to uplift those things and also help us refine those strategies, right? To like think about how we're even talking about mental health in our communities in the barbershops or at the kitchen table or in the church. But starting with from the place of understanding we have some tools, maybe we just need more.
Wow, that's so interesting to even, like you said, make those connections because you said we had it, and mental health has been such a stigma in our community. Being in this space and creating Beam, what have you kind of learned of why it's become a stigma in our community?
Yeah. It's interesting. Like I think, well, a couple of pieces I would say. Going back to that piece about that we've always kind of addressed mental health. I think Black people have always had language for mental health,
Yeah.
even though we may not have said bipolar or we may not say schizophrenic or whatever. We might not use that language, but we often have said things like she is touched or they're in
Mm.
the blues or they're in a mood or my nerves, which are different ways. We're just naming the same experiences with different language, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's really important to name. The stigma comes from a couple of different things, right? So we have American culture, which is this culture that's hyper fixated on productivity. How much can I produce? How much can I make? How much can I garner? And any experience you might have in your body that prevents you from being hyper productive puts you at risk for a lot of different things for survival, essentially,
Mm.
right? And so when we talk about mental health stigma in American culture, we have to talk about the real deeply, they call it ableism, this idea that I have to be able and perform in a certain kind of way. And the ways in which mental illness, the assumptions of mental illness we have, might prevent me from showing up in that way, which creates a stigma and silence around it, right?
Yeah.
There's also the shame that I think that we as Black people carry in this country, um, from the things that have happened to us, right? So, like, some of the stigma around mental health is also about the fact that in our country, unfortunately, the mental health industrial complex and the prison industrial complex are the same thing in many ways, right? So many of the folks we work with, they'll talk about the first time they ever even talked about therapy or heard anything about a therapist was either in some kind of prison system or in some kind of social system where like a cousin was taken away and they had a counselor, a social worker come visit, right? So we are deeply afraid of these systems because these systems have harmed us,
Yeah.
right? So making that disconnection is hard for folks, right? And it's not like it's stopped, it's ongoing. So for some people who have the privilege of not having to engage those systems, they can be like, oh, therapy is really the Sunday kind of Sunday on the couch talking lovely. Like they can see it like that. But a lot of folks have not experienced mental health like that. They've experienced it as something used against them to harm them. And I think that's where the stigma comes from. So the stigma is based in real harm, right? And sometimes the real harm can make it difficult for us to see how we can navigate, or sometimes it can make us a little more even deluded about what is still good here that we can get out of this system, if that makes sense,
Yeah.
when you've really been harmed by something. So even though mental health as a system the mental health industrial complex has been so harmful, there's still things that we can learn from those tools and systems that can be
Yeah.
useful. But when you've been harmed so much, you're scared to even engage that. You're like, well, I don't even know what that is. I don't want to
Yeah.
sit down and be judged by a therapist. I don't want to, people have all these ideas.
Yeah.
And so there's work for us to do on both ends to make it feel more safe for our folks.
Right. And there's definitely like a lot to unpack, and that can be scary to some people. Now, one of your
Yeah.
programs at Beam, you kind of, I guess, reimagined Black masculinity, Black toxic masculinity, and the connection is made from the men, Black men. What have you found those men who are coming into these programs before they let their walls down? What have you found that to be that they're kind of their light to kind of say, this is going to work and I need this?
Yeah. It's different for so many different folks. I think most of the folks who come to the Black Masculinity Reimagined program, I think last year we did about 400 folks came through,
Wow.
just through our virtual programs. I think what they're often looking for, they're recognizing is that the ways in which they've been taught to be masculine or to be men isn't working to help them get the connection and the love and the intimacy they want, right? And so that's across sexuality,
Yeah.
like straight men, gay men, recognizing that the idea I have to be invulnerable, fierce, strong, hard, you know, um, does and the ways in which like those narratives influence so many aspects of our life and being and our mental health.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people are suffering from them and realizing this isn't the route, but just trying to figure out how to show up differently and
Yeah.
trying to find communities that do support them in showing up differently, right? And showing up like, hey, you don't have to behave like this. You don't have to define yourself through how much sexual domination you have, how hard you look, how your body has to look like this, etc. Right? How you dominate women or how you dominate other men, right? Like, you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, and so I think that like that's a big driving factor because people are starting to make the connection between how these ideas create distress and harm,
Mm.
right? And so there's so many moments I see light bulbs come off when I facilitate those workshops. And of course, we have other staff like Leroy Mitchell and Sydney Brown who really help lead that initiative. But when I get a chance to step in, I think one part that really is powerful is that talk about the feelings wheel, and we give this opportunity to talk about how when you're a Black male child or a child assigned male at birth, um, people often interact with you and teach you to kind of emotionally cut off your feelings when you're really young, right?
Yeah.
I've often told the story of my godson Dante, who was now 18 years old, but 18 years ago, learning how to walk and falling, and I remember picking him up and he's crying, and family members and his family male family members being like, "Put him down, he's gonna be a punk,
Down.
let him
Yeah.
cry." And like so, it starts early. Early on, we're sending a message to a little child and to so many boy children: suck up your emotions and your feelings, repress them and hide them to appear strong. And so this child can't even walk yet, but he's getting the message.
Yeah.
And that's not the same message a girl will get, right? A girl will get coddled and supported, right? And so from this early age, we get that enshrined in us. And then we develop to become individuals at 40, 50 years old who have no clue how to connect with our emotionality, who
Yeah.
have no clue how to honor our vulnerability because we've been trained and pushed into this by not just our families, but also broader systems.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a light bulb for a lot of people there. They're like, whoa, like, I have been, I have learned this. And I think that, like, when I think about gay and straight cultures, I often say the narratives are the same. People are like, gay men are different. I'm like, no, not really.
Right.
Because, like, when I talk to gay men and they're like, I gotta be fierce, nobody can come for me. That's the same thing as straight dudes being like, I'm hard, nobody come, ain't sharing nothing with no man. It's the same logic. It's just portrayed differently,
Yeah.
performed differently.
Right.
But you see the same kind of narrative of dominance and also of isolation. It's the same thing when we talk about gay men in isolation, right? And depression rates are high in gay men's communities. Well, it's because I believe it's large part and due to those ideas around masculinity and manhood and
Yeah.
the inflexibility, the emotional inflexibility and the unwillingness to engage in any really emotional discourse because we haven't been taught that we have to, that prevents the kind of building intimacy and connection that we say we want.
No, definitely well said. And has social media made your mission harder?
No, not at all. I think that, like, social media can be a tool that can help facilitate spaces for wellness and connection, and can also be a tool that can, disseminate some of the most toxic and unhealthy concepts and ideas and videos and just tools, right? And so I think what we do and what we built up with our audience is really trying to share things that are helpful and useful that disrupt some of the more toxic or undesirable things that are happening in the world or that people
Yeah.
are posting in the world, right? Often a different narrative. And so I think that it's about how you use it. There's no doubt there's a large body of research that talks about how certain social media platforms do impact particularly young people's mental health in adverse ways. But so there is work to be done there. But
Yeah.
I think that there's an opportunity for us to really think about what we are posting, creating, making. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Definitely, definitely. Now, in the realm of talking about, masculinity, do you feel that it's, mental health wasn't talked about, in our father's generation, grandfather's generation. Um, how do you suggest we approach these types of conversations with our fathers or grandfathers? Do you think it's our responsibility to bring them along our healing journey?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I would add that, like, I do believe that our grandfathers and fathers talked about it, just talked about it differently and maybe not as much. Like,
Okay.
like when I talk to my father and a lot of the elders in my family, they always have stories of where, he's always been in the mood his whole life. Like, that's the way they're talking about mental health. They're just not using the language that we have in this era to kind of name it because that language wasn't accessible back
Right.
then, right? So I think that people always have the language. I'm a big believer that you have to model the behavior you want to see in the world. And I can tell you with my family, me getting into this work, of course, brings up things and conversations we have and dialogue. I do, and sharing my therapy journey, sharing my healing journey, and not just with therapy, like, I'm a yoga teacher. I've also participated in Reiki. I have a Reiki coach. I participate in a variety of different spiritual and emotional practices that help cultivate wellness for me. And sharing those things, it's been interesting to see how my family, my parents particularly, have kind of like been like, "Oh, tell me more about that. That's
Yeah.
interesting." You know what I mean? Like they're taking different pieces and making them their own. And I think that's a really beautiful strategy to model the behavior and just share your journey as opposed to coming in and trying to shame people for not doing what you do. You know
Mm.
what I mean? Or not doing it the way you do. Like, I often correlate it to like what happened when I was a vegetarian years ago. I came home and I just decided to start making my greens without any meat, with
Yeah.
like, bell peppers and chili peppers and made them really spicy. And every once in a while, my mom would them start sticking in the pot. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
I don't know nothing about that at first. I don't know nothing about that. Then over time, they started tasting them and trying them. It was like, oh, this is pretty good. And now it's a staple, something that like my brother will call me like, hey, tell me how to make these greens,
Yeah.
right? So it's about sharing. It's not about judging. If I had came home and went like, y'all gotta stop eating pork because y'all da, 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 da. Shaming as a strategy for healing, everything we know about behavior change, that doesn't happen. So I
Mm.
didn't shame. I just said, this is what I'm doing for me. Let me share with you. Is this helpful? And they took what was. And some
Mhm.
of that study was like, no, I ain't eating no oat milk. I ain't doing that with you.
All right.
Same thing with our mental health strategies, our tools, our frameworks that we're using, going in and just modeling behavior.
I love that. It's about sharing, not shaming. That's what you said, right? I love
There
that.
it is. There it
I
is.
think, yeah, I think a lot of us approach it because we want to. I guess they got this thing now. It's called like reparenting, and people
Mhm.
come in and they're harsh, and they make the parents feel like whatever for the certain situations. So I think, like you said, it is important to kind of, I guess, be a little bit more gentle because it's a cycle that we're trying to break.
And it's a practice of learning how to be gentle. Like, I think that for our communities, some of us have never felt like we had the space and capacity to be gentle because the world has never been gentle with us.
Mm,
And when you're talking about the reparenting process, right? Like, really reconnecting with your inner child, a part of that process will elicit rage and feelings of frustration. There's no
yeah.
doubt about it. We're going to sometimes like look at things, the choices that our parents or our caregivers did, and they're going to piss us off, right? You know what I mean? They're going to make us angry. They're going to make us mad. And we have a right to our anger. We have a right to our mad, and we have a right to say that, hey, the way you did this hurt me deeply, or the way you didn't do this hurt me deeply.
Yeah.
We can hold that. I believe that as we grow in our emotional complexity, we can hold our rage and our anger, and also hold, without dismissing the anger and rage, that oftentimes the people who raised us, who reared us, came up in environments, situations, or scenarios where they didn't have tools, where they didn't have the things that we've wanted for them, they never even knew because they never had them modeled for them.
Yeah.
And so they were often working with very limited resources, emotional, spiritual, whatever, to kind of show up in this way that we needed them to in that time. And so holding both of those, right? I'm mad at you, and I also
Yeah.
see the context of how you were raised, how what you went through with your father and your mother and your family
Yeah.
that made you do the things you did that still I am angry and upset about, right? Like, I have a right to be angry about. And how do we express that anger in a way that centers the dignity of that person? It's very clear that this behavior, like, holds a line of saying this behavior is not acceptable. I will not allow this continue to me, but also hold that like this is a human who made a really flawed and deeply, deeply troubling mistake.
Right.
Holding that is not easy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's not easy. And that's a part of the healing work for all of our communities, to figure out how to do that, how to be in that anger with dignity, and
Hmm.
or step away from that, step away from it until you can be in dignity. If you can't be in dignity,
Yeah.
sometimes it's just like I can't even be with you. You
Yeah.
can connect with you. That's also real for us too. So I think that there's this opportunities for us to continue to grow in that way.
Yeah. Oh my God, I love that. You're just like that's just a word. I love that. I love that. Now, what are some misconceptions have you found that our community has when we do discuss mental health?
Yeah. First misconception I see is that people think that mental health means mental illness, right?
Hmm.
They make that immediate conflation. I often try to remind people that just like we all have physical health, like, your physical health is might be a certain day,
Yeah.
but if I go to my computer, I'm like, so you got some mental health? I ain't got no mental health. No, I ain't got no. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, do you have physical health? Yes. So you also have mental health. Doesn't mean that you have mental illness, right?
Right.
Mental health is a very vague term because health means a lot of different things and a lot of different people. It's very ambiguous, right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh, he's healthy, but what does that really mean? What measurements do we have for that? And there's a lot of contention in the scientific community about what that looks like. But I think that, like, the first piece is the contention of mental health does not mean mental illness, and the second piece is that you can be living with a condition, um, bipolar, depression. You can be living with an anxiety disorder, and still have, quote unquote, a mental health state that feels like it's in equilibrium for you,
Yeah.
that feels like it's in alignment or grounded for you, right? If you're taking your medication, if you're practicing your wellness, like, having that condition does not mean that you will be in this state of dysregulation for the rest of your life
Yeah.
consistently, if that makes sense, right? Like, there'll be periods of different changes, just like all of us. Whether we have a diagnosable condition or not, we have days when we are feeling alignment and grounded, and days when we are not, when we are struggling emotionally, right? And it might not qualify for the criteria for a diagnosis, but it does still connect to the fact that we all have our waves and we have to ride in
Yeah.
different ways. So I think that, like, really demystifying mental health is hoping to hold those nuances, and also destigmatizing the myths that we hear about people with bipolar, or with schizophrenia, right? Like, the myth that, like, bipolar equals violence, right? When
Yeah.
we say all the literature shows that that's not the case, right? And you hear the APA, I'm sorry, American Psychological Association, or we call APA for short, and many entities are always telling people, they're like, hey, actually, the literature that we've seen from all the research we've done
Right.
shows that people who have mental conditions, who have diagnosed mental conditions, are less likely to harm others than they are themselves, right? And so, but like, the media still holds that very strong.
Yeah.
They're like, oh, it's because of a mental illness, etc. So there's a lot of nuance in there. But that's just some piece I think is really important to hold as well. This is like something that's um, a myth. And the last piece I'll say is just medication. Um, medication, like any tool, can be useful to us when we have a good relationship with it. When we have a relationship with it that's in alignment with our bodies. It takes time to do that. It takes really good care and like good psychiatrists and doctors to help you do that.
Yeah.
But I think one thing that really concerns me in many Black communities is that we often hear a lot of medication shaming, right? Like, go to the apple cider vinegar, go to something else. And I'm not dismissing apple cider vinegar as a viable strategy for some
Right.
things, but it's just like some things you need different tools for.
Yeah.
And yes, the medication will have side effects in different ways. However, we have to work really vigilantly with these psychiatrists and these doctors and these pharmaceutical companies to develop medications that don't have these adverse impacts on us or help us regulate the symptoms of it by giving us other things, whether it be natural remedies,
Yeah.
etc., so that we can continue to cultivate um, medicine for our folks that helps them regulate and be grounded. So I'll
Right.
stop there.
No, no, it's so interesting you brought up like the healthcare system and all this because our community, we do have a distrust, rightfully so, when it comes to certain aspects of the healthcare system. So, what advice would you give them kind of going in, knowing the system wasn't made for us? I mean, it definitely shows the importance of having, Black doctors and, health physicians of that case. But like you said, there can be a positive result from it. What advice would you give to someone that's very hesitant because of that reason, the trust issue?
Yeah, the trust is legitimate. The
Yeah.
fear is legitimate. The anxiety, the concern is
Yeah.
legitimate. Starting there and owning that, and then finding allies, finding community, someone who will go in there with you to help you advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
Whether it means that you go to your auntie's doctor appointments with her because she doesn't speak up that much, but you
Yeah.
have a lot of questions that she don't ask,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes it's bringing somebody else that you trust and love with you into that system. And having someone to help you navigate those systems and asking those questions and not being afraid to be like, I don't understand what this paperwork says,
Yeah.
and like, for me, I'm always encouraging us as Black people or as all people to really realize that like these people work for you. And I
Yeah.
know my doctors are done with me, honey. They see me coming, they be like, okay, here he comes. Because I'm like, I have a question. You work for me.
Yeah.
No, I'm not done yet.
Yeah.
I'm not done yet. They'll be like, and I walk into that space with a sense of entitlement because I'm paying you a lot of money to be here.
A lot of money. Yeah.
And so, and like, and so guess what? The 15 little 2 minute run in, that's not gonna cut it because I have a lot more questions, I have a lot more needs, and I demanded that be responded. And they shift. When my experience, they're very shocked because they're
Yeah.
used to us, particularly Black people, coming there head low, we scared, we don't ask no questions, we don't know nothing. I'm like, no, I have a lot of questions, and
Yeah.
like I want the time right now to attend to that because I'm paying you what $200, whatever I'm paying you for this visit.
Right.
So I think those are some things I think important for any mental health, any medical engagement in
Yeah.
general. Is get a buddy, get a community to navigate, ask the questions, and remember they work for you.
Yeah. Thank you for that. I've always wanted because of we just always had that in the community, and I'm like, I feel like there's ways to maneuver it. Now you have like a front seat to a lot of emotions, and I know you teach yoga, but what else do you do to make sure that your mental health is still intact? Because now you have this big organization, and I'm sure it can get to be too much. So what are some things you're doing to continue with your mental health?
Yeah, mental health journey is like, it's an ongoing journey. I have a lot of things in my life that help root me and ground me to keep me in a state of what I call equilibrium, right?
Mhm.
Like, the first thing I said is so important for any kind of like grounding is to have uh, routines and rituals that keep you
Mhm.
grounded. So, for example, when I wake up in the morning, I have my water, I do my meditation. I always tell people you ain't got to know 3 hours of meditation. Everybody have time for that. You can do like a 5, 10 minute
Yeah, yeah,
meditation. I do my prayers and my intentions for the day, right? I pull my tarot card for the day, which is also part of my practice. And sometimes I do like a 15-minute, 20-minute yoga flow.
yeah,
Doing that in the morning consistently helps stabilize me. The yoga helps, of course, we have all this, research that talks about the ways in which it helps your nervous system,
yeah,
your circulatory system, all these different dimensions, right? Doing that consistently in the middle of the day, I make sure I get a chance to go to take a walk, to get
yeah,
some sunlight, to get some air, to get some, to get outside of my head a little bit. And then, of course, in the evening, like really having same kind of close down pray, like rituals, whether it's prayer or reading something inspirational before I go to bed. So I think ritual is a big part of it. Of course, I have a therapist. I have a Reiki coach. Reiki is a ancient Japanese healing, energy healing practice that I participate in, and also like go to, who gives me really great insight. I have friends who also are very invested in wellness. So my peer circle, we're able to discuss and share books and read and learn. That helps keep me connected too. They hold me accountable. And then the last piece I would say with the organization is really having boundaries, right?
Yeah.
And really centering healing around that. Like, um, one things I'm proud of most, I would say, with Beam is really establishing that our wellness is just as critical as the work. So, after I get this phone call with you, we just had our summit. We're closed for the week because we're taking a break because we just spent, a great deal of time not
Yeah.
only doing other coaching and training and education and holding space for folks that we do every day,
Yeah.
but then we also doing a summit on top of that, right? So we need our time to recuperate, to rejuvenate for ourselves, to be with our families. And so it's about putting into practice some boundaries and taking care of ourselves um, in ways that maybe the dominant system doesn't think are normal. Because
Yeah.
in the dominant system, is work, work, work.
Right.
Doing that is important.
Wow, I love that. I love that. All right, my final question is, what's next for you and what's next for Beam?
What's next for me and what's next for Beam? Wow, big question, big questions. I would say with Beam, we just want to continue to cultivate wellness spaces for our folks. We have a lot of different ideas about what that can look like, particularly as we begin to move out of, or not even move out, particularly as the pandemic continues to change and shift, right? As we see more and more people being in public space. Before the pandemic, we were all in public communities, right? We were in the churches, community centers across the country. And with the pandemic, we had to be virtual. So now we're getting ready to ease back into community in a different way
Yeah.
and trying to learn how to do that to protect the safety of our folks, but also how to build new tools, posters, some other educational pieces we have coming up, other mediums that we can continue to uplift the conversation and make sure that skills are centered just as much as the dialogue. So that's some of the things we got coming up. We're really excited to share and build on. So.
I love that. I love that. Well, thanks for talking with me. I mean, I do have to ask a question. This is just off the cuff. Do you have any like self-help books that I know you're a writer, but have you written any like self-help books that people can buy?
Yeah,
Is
there
it
are a lot
good?
of books. This is a big question, right? So I do have a book I wrote about. Oh goodness, Lord, came out in 2012,
Okay.
called Dear Universe. Dear Universe: Letters of Affirmation and Empowerment for All of Us. It
Okay.
is one of my. So that is an affirmation book. I was named a BET Health Hero for that book, so that was really cool. So that's one book. Other books for self help and wellness. See, I have one I'm reading right now by Dr. Thema. If you're not familiar with Dr. Thema, she actually is the Black woman president of the American Psychological Association. It's called
Right.
Homecoming,
Okay.
and it's overcome fear and trauma to reclaim your whole authentic self. And so she's an
Okay.
amazing Black woman who's a psychologist, lives here in Los Angeles. Definitely recommend. Um, I think what other self help books I read so much.
Yeah. Oh, okay.
That
Are you writing one?
I have some book projects on the table that we'll see,
Okay.
like as they continue to flourish. Oh, I forgot I have another book here. I have in the background. This is a really beautiful book. I had a privilege to be a part of. New York Times bestseller, Tarana Burke and Dr. Brene Brown. You Are Your Best Things, collection of essays from Black folks about healing, shame, vulnerability, transformation. Definitely a book that is a good mirror if you're
Yeah.
interested in doing that wellness work. And then I will shout out my girl Michelle Williams. Her book Checking In is a really great book, particularly people of faith who want to examine their mental health and how it shows up. So
Yeah.
I'll leave it there. I could go on all day, but I'll leave it there with those.
Awesome. Also, thanks for those suggestions. Definitely going to check it out. And once again, thank you so much for talking with us. Appreciate it. Learned a lot. And good luck with everything you have going on. Is a much needed space. And I know I definitely appreciate it. And I look forward to getting more into your journey and just learning more about Beam.
Thank you so much for making time for this important conversation and the platform you're holding for our folks.
Of course, of
Appreciate it.
course, of course. Take care. Enjoy your week off and your rest. Well deserved.
Thank you.
And we'll be in touch.
We'll be in touch. Dear.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.